The historian M. Florian, in his book The History of the Moors of Spain, discusses the Islamic civilization of Al-Andalus, and in particular the Moors, the people of northwest Africa, when they conquered Spain, how they influenced and built up that civilization. However, a particular passage from the publisher's advertisement of the 1841 edition of that book struck me particularly, and that was the following quote: "Nor is it too much to say that to them Christian Europe, meaning to the Muslims, is indebted for the general impulse which led to the revival of learning in the 13th and 14th centuries. This reflects a certain universal reality shared by all civilizations and shared by the vast human experience across history, and that is that knowledge is in a constant state and process of development. And learning and knowledge spans civilizations. One great civilization inherits knowledge from another civilization, and by doing so, they inevitably refine that knowledge and adapt it to their own context. Just as how medieval Christian scholasticism and medieval Jewish scholarship were influenced by Islamic scholarship, just as how the great figures of Jewish theology and Christian theology, such as St. Thomas Aquinas and Rambam Maimonides, were heavily influenced by Muslim theology and Muslim philosophy, so too were Muslim philosophers and thinkers influenced by those who came before them. The common similarity between all of these is that they adapted this knowledge and applied it to their own contexts and to their own traditions, thus constituting a growing tradition where knowledge was continuously adapted and refined and built upon. There's a common preconceived notion that religion tends to be a static force and that religions stop human development. On the contrary, history tells us that religion is a constant development, whereby new ideas and new forms of theology are formed to counteract challenges to religious creed in each time and place. A good case study for this would be Islamic civilization, and how various theologies developed in that civilization to respond to the various philosophies and challenges present at that time. Muslim scholars took it upon themselves to adapt theology and philosophy and to apply it in a Muslim context so as to defeat the inevitable intellectual challenges posed by other philosophical and religious traditions of that time. Such a basis for such seeking of knowledge and refining it for their own context could have been taken from religious texts. For example, the Quran discusses this in relation to the Christians and the Jews, where it says, "O people of the book, let us come to common terms." This verse indicates that the Muslims were allowed to use a common language and a common method, mainly theology, to debate and discuss with the people of the book, meaning the Christians and the Jews. As such, this necessitated that if Muslims wanted to discuss theology with Muslims and Jews, with Christians and Jews, then if they needed to use philosophy for such a common agreement and such a common discussion, then that would have been necessary. If they needed rational theology, then that would have been necessary. And if they needed scriptural evidence, then that would have been necessary as well. The Quran challenges and entices the Muslim people to engage in rational discussion and to engage in knowledge, as it says, "Do you not think?" from chapter 2, verse 44. As such, the Quranic text challenges Muslims to engage in rational thought and rational discussion. Furthermore, a basis for such seeking of knowledge and of refining it can be found in the hadith literature. For example, The famous, if not apocryphal, statement attributed to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, seek knowledge even if in China. Although some scholars of prophetic traditions have traditionally said that this narration from the Prophet Muhammad is weak or even fabricated, many have disputed this claim and have said that there are many chains of transmission for this narration, due to which it reaches the level of being a good hadith, meaning slightly strong hadith. The fundamental principle that can be derived from this is that the Islamic faith encourages the seeking of all forms of knowledge, then to refine it, then to adapt it and apply it to an Islamic context. Historically, this is a trend that we notice in all civilizations. The fundamental nature of knowledge in all civilizations, regardless of which civilization it is the constant transfer and development of knowledge and applying that knowledge in one's own context. We can see this constant transfer from the Greeks to the Romans, then to the Muslims, then to medieval Christendom, and then to modern Europe. And we can see how one of these events leads directly onto another. For example, how the Muslims preserved Greek and Roman philosophical and religious texts, which ended up influencing medieval Christian scholasticism and which then ended up resulting in the Renaissance of Europe. Such philosophical and theological pursuits led to the development of the Sunni schools of theological thought, which include the Ash'ari, Maturidi, and Athari schools. The Ash'ari and Maturidi schools in particular synthesized more and more elements of rational theology and philosophy with scriptural traditions and with scriptural evidence. A very good example of this would be the Ash'ari scholar Al-Bayhaqi, who passed away in the year 458 of the Islamic calendar. He synthesized Ash'ari thought with Quranic verses and hadith traditions on God's names and attributes in his masterful work Al-Asma wa Sifat, the names and attributes of God. Another example of this would be the development of the issue of pronunciation. Al-Bukhari and Al-Muslim, the two main hadith scholars of the Muslim world, argued that the pronunciation of the Quran is created, whereas the Quran in and of itself is uncreated. This further led to the likes of Ibn Kullab, Al-Muhasibi, and Al-Qalanisi to make the Kalam Nafsi and Kalam Lafsi distinction, mainly the distinction between the speech of God which resides with his essence and the manifested speech of God which comes in the forms of sounds and letters which is created. A very obvious development here would be Al-Ash'ari and Al-Maturidi developing their own schools. There was a common understanding amongst Muslim scholarship throughout history that these schools were part of a constant development and a constant growing tradition. Whilst the tools they employed were different from that of the time of the Prophet Muhammad, the fundamental beliefs were still the same.